I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. Today we're going to review the latest, 5th Rogue Wave album, Nightingale Floors. Now, Tom, a couple years ago we reviewed Rogue Wave's 2009 album, Permalite. This has actually been a band that I've followed since their inception, before when Zach Rogue was just a guy in a guitar, landed some sort of indie label contract and produced and put out Out of the Shadow, which has actually been heralded as like a very good one, an established indie rock classic, right? Very intimate sounding debut album with, you know, acoustic guitar, lots of cool production, very melody based, layered vocals, things like that. After that album came out, Zach Rogue got himself a band. It's pretty much the, you know, as quoting all music here, but it's the indie rock band success story. I mean, that's what this is. And really what comes to my mind was when you think of this band and their next 3 albums, they really expanded their sound and they tried to do things, they experimented with things, taking it from just your traditional indie rock. They experimented and tried to make it more visceral and experimental in its purpose. And then also in Permalite, you saw a move into a much more dancey sort of way. You saw big beats, a very upbeat sounding album at times.
Poppier, brighter.
Definitely poppier, definitely produced brighter, and overall just had a lot of energy. Now, we came off of that album really liking that direction for Rogue Wave as being something different that seemed to work for the band. Maybe not in our own personal taste, but that's where, you know, as music reviewers, we sometimes set our personal biases aside and just review the music and how it works for the band. Now, for Nightingale Floors, I would describe Nightingale Floors as a move kind of back into the indie rock arena. They're definitely going for much more gritty indie rock sound. But Tom, what was your take on Nightingale Floors?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you in the assessment of just its style, because this is not what I was expecting going into this. Usually when bands start to move in a poppier direction, it's kind of a magnet. It just keeps pulling you in. You get deeper and deeper into that. We actually saw that recently with Tegan and Sara. I mean, Sainthood from 2009 was a little bit sharper of a production sound, and then what do you know, their next album, I don't even remember what it was called. We reviewed it pretty recently.
Sure, but Nightingale Floors, Nightingale Floors isn't even that level of an extreme change.
It's not. It's not at all. But with it, it's not what I was expecting. So you get a lot more interesting instrumentality. You get a lot of even time signature changes and things where you can tell, wow, they were really focused on how this was put together. I mean, dissecting it to the point where even just one measure they mess with, you know, and that can really have a profound effect on how at least I listen to an album, because when I hear detail like that, I can tell that that's the level of detail that was put into it. So from there, I was impressed from that standpoint. They also mess around with a lot more moods, where we are talking about Permalite being an overall brighter album. There are bright spots on here, but it doesn't overwhelm the album. There's some very intimate moments, some softer moments, some more fun moments. Some moments that almost reminded me, like in track 2, College, reminded me kind of like Fang Island, where you get this very celebratory rock sound. So that was really interesting for me. Coming out of that, though, it kind of just came down to how much did I like the songs? And I felt like it was a little hit or miss. There's some songs that I really liked, and the highlights actually reached a peak for me that I didn't expect from these guys. Just because, well, I like them, you know, they're a good indie rock band. They've never really had a profound enough impact on me to have, you know, a long-lasting feeling or comeback quality.
Yeah, one thing this band's always struggled with is a sense of scope and ambition, right?
Totally,
They always make decent records, but they never seem to execute something that's at a higher level.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I felt about this one too. So there were moments that really surprised me, but overall I came out of it just kind of thinking, you know, I think that this could have been bigger than what it was.
Personally, I think that the strength of this album lies within the cohesion in the sound, which they really, I think, is an attribute to a lot of the work done in the guitars part of the sound. The guitars on this album are constantly working at adding melody. Now, with all Rogue Wave albums, you always have Zach Rogue's vocals that he has just this iconic voice that just sucks you in. Something about his voice just acts as a hook on its own. He could literally sing anything and it would just make it sound poppy, quirky, and indie. So I love his voice, and I gotta give him credit. And honestly, I wish I had a little bit more of that on this album, because it would have given these tracks a little bit more personality. The tracks, I agree with you, there were certain tracks that just stood out on this album because I felt there was more personality infused. Too much of the time I felt like on on this album, it was bogged down by this cohesive, just muddy indie rock sound. They didn't do enough to break out of that, to provide separation, and if they're not going to provide separation, then provide purpose. And it's kind of one or the other, and they just stayed in the middle, and I didn't feel like I got enough of that purpose to really justify this cohesion in the sound. In addition, I felt like there was some production issues on this album. I felt like the guitars just weren't as sharp. I mean, it was all just distortion, and it didn't really fit the vocals, which it's kind of an odd fit since it's an indie rock band. You know, to experiment with distortion is okay, but even some of the vocal effects that they were doing, they were just going for a more lo-fi sound, and I like lo-fi when it fits the style of music that you're writing, but at times I felt like it was in contrast with the style here, and so it fought it, and it made it a little bit more painful for me to swallow, with the exception being with track 8, Without Pain, because that was without pain. So, but overall, I felt like this album could have been a little bit stronger than it was. I actually started liking this a lot more, and then slowly came down on it, focusing mainly on my highlights. And one thing I got to give them credit for, Rogue Wave, they're just good songwriters in the vein of like the Arcade Fire and Wolf Parade. I feel like this band is like cut from that same cloth, and they just write good songs because they know inherently how to write catchy melodies and still keep them unique enough to separate themselves from the pack.
Yeah, I'll agree.
What would you give this album, Tom?
I'm going to give it a 71.
I'm right there with you.
All right.
That's the second review in a row. We've been exactly at the same spot.
Yes.
But that's where this album is. I mean, it has a lot of really good qualities. A score in the low 70s for us is not something that we found amazing or even think is really good. It's something that if you're a fan of the band, definitely check out. And if you're into just casual indie rock with a very cohesive sound with guitars and catchy vocal patterns, this is definitely an album that I would throw your way. However, if that doesn't sound like your thing, it's probably okay to pass on it. Please let us know what you thought about Nightingale Floors at www.velocitiesandmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, because that's where we do most of our talking with you guys, and you guys do such a good job of keeping us up to date on what albums from 2013 we need to be reviewing. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.
Holy rollers, pictures of the house of